As listed in the credits you just saw, my name is Thomas J. Kelly, and I chose to open this documentary here at the intersection of Central Boulevard and Division Avenue for historical and geographic reasons, as well as for the high contrast between the words central and division, which I felt was an appropriate metaphor for introducing a documentary on race relations. Central Boulevard is generic sounding and nondescript, a commonly used street name found in many American cities, whereas Division Avenue is an historical heirloom from Orange County's Jim Crow days, since the aptly named Division Avenue runs parallel to the railroad tracks, which are just 3 blocks away. Railroad tracks throughout the South were traditionally used to delineate between the black and white parts of town, whereas today, in addition to these physical boundaries, there is also an indicative this for that social contract, which over the years has done nothing more than alienate one race from the other, once the seasonal renegotiations for racial entitlements and block voting have been allotted to the highest white bidder. When an occasion such as Black History Month or a local news story prompts us to consider our roles as individuals in the American continuum inspired by the Civil Rights era, we over the years have become conditioned to view a local Southern police department, such as the Orlando Police Department on the southeast block of this intersection, as a symbol of white oppression, whereas a federal courthouse, such as the one right here on the northeast block, we are conditioned to view as a symbol of enlightenment. A symbol of enlightenment to be won by exposing our prejudices squarely before our constitutional ideals. Yet in the Ellis school desegregation case, an exceptional case in many ways, an imposing police presence was never necessary to enforce any court order. And in some ways, our federal court system dehumanized the black and white social bonds that had been developing here in Orange County and in the South since the end of the Civil War. Black and white Americans in the 1950s and 1960s, working at the grassroots level, along with a white Congress and a white president, enacted the legislation which enabled the civil rights movement to take hold of the entire country and initiate a new era in American history. When we hear the rather trite saying, "A picture is worth 1,000 words," we instinctively flatter ourselves that others less sophisticated might still be gullible to such a meaningless, worn out, and obsolete saying. Yet whenever we see a photograph or a newsreel from the Civil Rights era, we become solemn and somewhat deferential, never daring to question or consider if the message's inconspicuous messenger has an objective. America has been the dominant world culture for as long as any of us can remember, so having our history recorded is as naturally expected as the next presidential election or hearing fireworks on the 4th of July. Yet how many of us have ever wondered, what is the purpose for recording our history? Or perhaps even more importantly, who among us should be allowed to or be designated to record our history? In an egalitarian society, such as America is designed to be and strives to be, the most reflective answer to the second question would be that the most egalitarian among us would be the most qualified to record our history. More specifically, such an egalitarian person would be someone who had an initiative and was born with no social privileges, yet by persistently maneuvering and commingling his or her talents and objectives with other like-minded people, as well as by fawning the naive. This egalitarian person would then be able to deploy their version of history to both the middle classes and to the politically elite. And from the meager circumstances of his or her upbringing, this person would still have access to and credibility with the struggling classes and the poor, thereby accomplishing a complete indoctrination of the social strata. The title of my documentary is similarly situated in black and white, a documentary on Orange County's racial hegemony. Hegemony is a term from academia closely associated with Antonio Gramsci, the post-World War I working-class revolutionary, and is used to describe when one social class manipulates its rival social classes by having them reevaluate, then reformulate their own cultural norms and values for the manipulator's intended purpose of delegitimizing any and all explanations for the current social hierarchy, so that by this provocative gambit, the manipulating social class can then come to power and impose a new normative ideology. Normative ideology, which appears to be universally valid and morally beneficial to all, but in actuality only benefits the new ruling class. I should also say that I don't have a PhD or any type of degree in philosophy or liberal arts. My degree is in engineering, and having been inspired by what I discovered during the course of my research for this documentary, I wrote that definition of hegemony quite naturally and candidly, since there is very little about my topic which is obscure to me anymore. My documentary hopes to demonstrate that this new ruling class is the black community, which despite its economic poverty and criminal attrition, nevertheless rose to this preeminent cultural position as a consequence of the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. And as of today, 2012, still retains this position, although the upcoming presidential election and the contrast between the Trayvon Martin case and the Robert Champion Jr. case could quite dramatically alter the black community's long-standing presumption of moral prominence here in Orange County, as well as across the nation. You may also have noticed that even though this documentary is structured around the Ellis case, I did not include the Ellis case anywhere in the title. This gives me the opportunity to point out that my purpose is not to collect, then sequence a bunch of information, but rather to demonstrate the persistent legacy that the civil rights movement has had on transforming Orange County and our nation as a whole, which might not be apparent to the newer generations or to those who have moved here from overseas, or might not even be apparent to ourselves. My family moved from Virginia Beach, Virginia to Orange County, Florida during Memorial Day weekend in 1966 when I was 3 years old. The following school year, I began kindergarten on the Navy base, which at that time was an Air Force base. Then I went to St. Margaret Mary Catholic School in Winter Park, followed by Glenridge Junior High. Then I graduated from Winter Park High School in 1980. Then the University of Florida with a computer engineering degree in 1984. To brief you on the research I have done, I have copied and read every Ellis Court record on file at the clerk's office, except for the stacks of bus routes and school zone descriptions which were filed in the case during the early 1970s, although I did copy a few and have read them. I have also downloaded and read the more recent Ellis Court records that the clerk's office put online at www.pacer.gov. I own several dozen U.S. Commission on Civil Rights publications and other printed material on the Civil Rights era. And I spent a week at the Florida Archives in Tallahassee and have done considerable amounts of research at the UCF and Rollins College libraries, as well as at the Downtown Orlando Public Library and the Orange County Regional History Center. And I have received public records requests from Orlando City Hall, the National Archives, and the Ninth Judicial Circuit. And I have interviewed in person or have corresponded with several Central Floridians and a few people from out of state. Finally, I would like to point out that when people talk about minorities today in Orange County, they are talking about a wide assortment of ethnicities and nationalities, which did not exist until after the critical events of the Ellis case had already taken place. An example of this population shift would be that today there are more Hispanic students than black students in the Orange County public school system. And students from all over the globe speaking a wide assortment of languages are enrolled here. So you would expect that the traditional black versus white battle lines would have been dissipated by this new racial and ethnic terrain. However, that is not the case. As Judge Ann Conway points out in her final order, there is a seeming exclusiveness to America's race relations which binds black to white and white to black, just as if they are two rival brothers who become united in the presence of an outsider, yet once alone again, all such propriety is pushed aside so that the attrition can begin anew, whether in the form of self-righteous comments, perennial vendettas, or a pacifying national deficit. From Judge Ann Conway's final order. With the exception of a motion to withdraw as counsel in 2007, there was no docket activity in this case from September 2000 to January 2010. In other words, the case remained dormant for 10 years. In January 2010, the case was revived by a proposed intervener who sought Hispanic representation on the Biracial Advisory Committee. The parties jointly responded in opposition to the intervener's motion, intimating that they intended to present a proposed settlement agreement to the court for approval within the next few days. End of quote. Having done considerable amounts of original research, as well as substantial amounts of counter research, I expect that my documentary will be informative and thought-provoking. So if you have any questions or comments, please contact me at tomkelly37@netzero.com, which is the email I have been using for all of my correspondence. With my opening segment now complete, I will begin the substantive part of the documentary by walking 1 block north along Division Avenue, then turning left on West Washington Street and walking 1 block more to the Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Institutional Church.